Hi viewers, and today we're going to be looking at GUIs again and controlling objects in geometry via a actual window with a slider on there, like so. Very simple. Small macro, not many lines, and we'll be going through actually creating the window, the slider, different types of layout that you can actually place those in with, also looking at multiple sliders and how to lay those out. The orientation of the slider, set minimum maximum value, and also how to actually control rotations using radians, because at the moment when you do anything in FreeCAD manually, you're controlling it via the degrees in angle. When you're using macros, you have to use radians. If you like this video, please hit a like and also subscribe to the channel. I also have a Ko-Fi site where you can actually donate to my contributions to the community, and that's at ko-fi.com/mang0. So let's make a start. So the first thing I'm going to do is jump into the macro. I'm going to go to macros and I'm going to create a new macro. Now this is going to be used in a slider, so I'm going to call this animation via slider, but you can call it whatever you want. We're going to be using object orientated Python. So first of all, we need to actually create a class. So use the keyword class, and I'm going to call this animation slider window. You can call it what you want, and I'm going to open and close the bracket there. I'm going to put a colon. So anything tagged over into here will be part of this class. Now classes have an initialization method, so this is the actual constructor, and we define this with def and underscore underscore init underscore underscore, and then we pass in a variable called self, and that self will actually be the class itself. So we actually reference everything in the class by the keyword self. Put colon, and we'll tab into that, so we're now actually in this method here, so in the init method. So this will run on each time the actual animation slider window class is actually created. When we instantiate a new version of it, this will run automatically, and I can actually prove that by using the word print in here, and I'm just going to place in the words init, so I can just show you what happens. So at the moment this won't actually work. What I'll actually need to do is bring out the panels and the report view, so anything that's output into the report view is from here. So I'll run this now. You can see we get no errors, but nothing's coming up, and that's because we need to create a new instance of this class. Now to do that, I'll just create a variable. I'm just going to call it my window, and we equals that to animation slider window, and that will just create a new version of this and should print out init. There we go. Down here you can see down here we've got init, so just by doing this, that's actually created a new version of this class, and this is now an object, and it runs the actual initialization method. Now, because I want to use a window with sliders in there, I'm going to have to actually bring in the Qt framework. So this is a library that's in Python. So we use from PySide. Now there's a number of ways to doing this. I'm going to use a different way than I've used before. I'm going to use from PySide dot Qt GUI. So I'm actually referencing the PySide library and the Qt GUI namespace in there, and I'm going to import star. So I've imported everything in there. So if I just extended this class with Qt widget, what that would do is actually allow me to it's actually Q widget, I keep forgetting that. So Q widget, so what that's done is from PySide Qt GUI, it's actually pulled in the Q widget in here, and we've extended animation slider window to actually extend the Q widget class. So everything that's in Q widget is attached to the animation slider window. Now there's other ways to do an import, and I'll show you that in a minute, but this is the one that requires less code. In other videos I've actually used a different way, and I normally reference the actual namespace. It's down to preference, but this way I decided to use it on the videos because it's much less code. So what I'm going to do now is, because I've created a class which extends Q widget, so we're extending the actual Q widget namespace end. It's all the methods and properties are in this namespace. Is I'm going to actually run on this method, the initialization method. I'm going to actually run the initialization method of the Q widget. That will make sure that will bring all those methods and properties in. And to do that, you need to actually run the command super, so it's actually running the class, the super class of this class, which is the one it's extended, in other words Q widget. And in super, I need to pass in my animation slider window as a variable, and also self. So that's super, and then I use a dot, and then we run the actual initialization method on here. Because we're extending the class, the actual initialization method of the extended class doesn't actually get run, so we have to actually do this manually in the initialization method of our new class, if that makes sense. So now we need to add underscore underscore init. Probably spell it correctly, there we go, and underscore underscore and open close bracket. So that looks familiar. So we look here, got init self, and we're just running the init here. But remember that self is already been placed in here, so it's just the initialization of the Q widget itself. So by running that, what we've done is actually brought in all of our code from the Q widget that is to deal with properties and methods, and it's been inherited by the animation slider window. So if I run this now, we're still going to get the init, but if I do a let's try here, self.show, what we should happen is that the .show method is part of the Q widget, and that should mean that a window will pop open like so. That is being actually called from the Q widget method. So there's a Q widget method called show, and because we've inherited it, we can do self.show, and there it is. If I didn't inherit that, let's take out Q widget and just ram out super, it will come up and arrow down the bottom, so you can see object has no attribute show. So we're pulling through show on the actual Q widget there to create a new window. So that's good. What I want to do is, for any window that is opened up by the macro, is for that to actually appear on top of everything else. So when I go and create a new scene, for instance, and I've run my macro from here, it should appear on top of this scene. At the moment, if I run it, it will disappear. So we need it to actually stay on top. And as you can tell, I now need to actually go and find my script, my window again, and close it down. So to do that, we need to actually use something from the Qt core. So we first have to import from PySide the Qt core. .qt core, and that imports a number of flags, so I'm going to import star from there. So I now want to set a flag. So before the show, in here I'm going to go self dot, and I want to set the Windows flags of my window. Set window flags, open bracket, and in here we want Qt dot, and we want the window flag for stays on top, which is window stays on top hint, and close that bracket. So we've got self.set window flags, which is a method of the Qt widget. And what we're doing is actually running the method with this option, windows.stays on top. So when we run this now, what should happen if we jump to any part of our program, it will actually stay on top. Let's close that down. So that's that bit done. So we've got our window. Let's give it a bit of a title in as well. So self dot set window title, and then we can give this I'm going to call it animation slider. That just gives it a title. So we've got our basic window there with a title, and we can actually start filling that out with our sliders. Now, what I was saying about the Pi side, see, we can actually, we've got these imports here. We can actually do these one of two, or actually one of many different ways. See, I could actually go, if I take Qt GUI out and put import Qt GUI, all I'm doing there is importing the Qt GUI from Pi side. But the problem is that if we run that now, you can see errors, and that is because we have to actually write Qt GUI on the front of everything that's in that namespace. I think that's the only thing. There we go. So that's what happens with that one. So you know, you know exactly where QWidget is. I do prefer that method, but for this I'm going to use this method because it's less code, so we actually is less on screen and easier to learn. So that's our window up. We now need to actually define a layout and actually get some sliders in there. So I'm going to now create a layout, and I'm going to put it before the show, and I'm going to create I think a box layout. Yeah, I'll create a box layout. So there are a number of types of layouts, and this one is layout equals, so it's a variable equals Q, and then it's V for vertical box, so box layout. There's a number of them, so there's vertical box, horizontal box, there's grid, there's form layout as well, and they all have their uses. Form layout is a good one for labels and text boxes because it goes into basically a form type layout that you can add to. Box layout is basically, if you look at the box layout, what will happen is everything will go down the page on the vertical under each other. So, or if this was horizontal, it would be by the side. We'll demonstrate that later, but there's a number of different layouts that you can use, and I'll be using different ones depending on the type of sliders or the different objects I'll be placing on the screen. And I'll just try and mix and match them so you get an idea of how to use them and what they're used for. I often use the box layout or the grid layout for my tutorials. Seems like the only ones that I really need for this time being for this program. So that's the layout in there. Now we need something to add to the layout, and also I need to add the layout to the actual window itself. Self dot layout. So in the Q widget, spell that correctly, and it's not self dot layout, it's self dot set layout. Set layout, and to that we can actually append the layout too. So we just add in our layout. Now that's appended to the GUI widget. So we've set the layout and we've shown. So at the moment, if we run this, we can see that we've got a small window here with nothing much in there, and that's because we've set a layout to it. And if I close it, take that layout out, use the right hashes, there we go, run that again, you can see our windows come up different size. That's because we're appending the layout to it. Okay, so there you go. If the show was actually above this, say here, and we then added a layout, it will still work, but our window will stay at the default size or whatever size we actually set it. So I'm going to place that back down there. Right, we need some sliders to add to this layout now, so that's quite easy to do. So I'm going to actually create a variable called self.slider1, and I'm going to equal that to QSlider, and I've got to put a parameter in here called QT, and then it's either horizontal or vertical, so I'm going to go for a horizontal slider, and that will create a horizontal slider for me. At the moment it won't show because I haven't added it to the layout. So to add it to the layout, all I need to do is to look at the actual layout itself, and what we do is add it to that layout by using the method add widget. So let's have over layout.add widget, and then we use self.slider1, self.slider1. But before we actually run that, let's make sure that the layout is defined first, otherwise we're going to get an error. There we go. So that's there. And now we run it, you can actually see the sliders there. So that's good. So that slider's sitting there. Now, if I want to add multiple sliders to that, I just create a number of sliders, and then I can show you the box layout here. So let's just duplicate this up. So we've got 2, 3, and here we'll add the sliders in. 1, 2, and 3. So because they're in a horizontal box layout, vertical box layout, they will actually be laid on top of each other. So they're horizontal sliders. If I change one to a vertical, there we go, there's a vertical slider sitting there, so it's still in a box layout. And then if I change the box layout to a VH, you'll see they'll be put side by side. So if I was using horizontal sliders here, then I want to change these to vertical sliders, we can actually have this here. So there you go. So that's how those layouts work. Also, you can have multiple layouts in there. But for the time being, I only want one slider. So let's take that out. And I will stick with the horizontal layout for the time being. So there we go, there's the slider. Actually, I'm going to turn this to horizontal. So we've got a horizontal slider here. So that's our GUI done for the time being. We now need to actually hook this slider up to some methods to actually allow us to control the screen, and also I need to set some maximum and minimum values for the slider, so we'll do that next. Okay, so it's quite easy to actually set the minimum and maximum value for slider. All we need to do is use the method set minimum and set maximum and pass it a value in there. So self.slider dot set minimum, and then we're passing a value, And again for here, we do self.slider1. So these should be slider 1 dot set maximum, and we'll set that one just to 100. So that means the slider will start from 0 and go up to 100, and also we can actually return any value between. So let's return these values to the screen. So we just get rid of the print init, and I'm going to make a separate method in here which we're going to attach to the actual value change method of the slider. So in here I'm going to create a method called slider move, or slider moved, and we pass in self to that as well. And what we're going to do is create a variable called val, and we're going to equal that to the actual self.slider1.value, and that will pull in the actual value of the slider. And what I need to do is actually output that to the screen. Now we can't use print anymore because we're actually running this on an event, so we actually need to actually print to a object that's in FreeCAD. And to do that, I'm going to use the app.console.print message, and I'm just going to convert the value to a string, passing val to str. There we go. So app.console.print message str val, close brackets. So at the moment that won't work because we've got to attach it to the slider, and we can do that by first getting our slider self.slider1, and it's got a method called value changed. So it actually raises an event called value change, and what we're going to do is connect that to our self.slider move. So self.slider1.valueChange.connect, and then in brackets self.slider moved. So when we run this now, what we'll see is the values going across. You can see down the bottom you've got the values going across the screen and the actual value of the slider at the very bottom of the screen. So that's good, so that's working. We could put a new line and character in this to actually bring it down a line if we so desire, but I'm going to actually remove this in a minute, so we don't need that. So we've got the actual slider on screen, we've got the layout sorted, we've got the window open, we're outputting the actual message, we know the actual value is being pulled when we slide the slider. So what I'm going to do now is actually link this up to a scene, and I'm going to create a very simple scene. Start page, create new, and I'm going to go into the part, and I'm going to put a box on here, and we would just want to modify the actual rotation of this box, so the actual angle of the box, and we can get to that by clicking on the cube, going to the placement, and you've got the angle there. And if you go up to view panels and Python console, when we change this angle, you can see that at dot placement for the get document unnamed get object box, which is the internal name of for cube. So if I roll over cube, you can see valid internal name box on the bottom left hand side. So we know that's our internal name. If I add another box in there, in the roll over cube one, you can see it's got an internal name of box 001. We're going to just use the 1 at the moment. So what I want to do is rotate this. We're using this angle here, and we can see the actual command coming out down the bottom. Now I don't want to use FreeCAD.getDocument.unnamed.getObject. I actually want to use something called app.activeDocument.getObject. So that tells FreeCAD which document to use will be the actual one that's active at the time. So we could have multiple scenes open and use either or depending on which one's active. So if I type in here app dot, and you can see we've got some code completion here, which is nice, showing that's not actually in the editor itself, but we'll have to actually deal with that. We can actually use external editors if you want, but it can be a bit tricky to set those up. .get object, and in here I'm going to actually pass box, so that actually gets that box object there. And then I'm going to use dot placement, remember case dot placement, and then if we look up here, got placement equals that dot placement at vector, so we've got a rotation on there, dot rotation dot angle, and we just can set that one to 1. So that's worked, so that's actually rotated it, so I can actually use that command. But instead of equaling to 1, what we're going to do is just change the value to what we actually pull in our slider. So in here, I'm going to, where I've got val there, I'm just going to come down a line, tab over, drop that in there, and I'm just going to change 1 to val. Now we'll get some weird results in a minute, you'll see, because when we start rotating it, so I've just opened up the macro now, so I've swapped over, so you can see the reason why we actually do the on top hint there to actually keep you on top. When I start moving this, it's spinning like a good one there, so we've got to figure out what's going on there. So now we need to actually control that rotation. Now the reason why it's going absolutely bonkers at the moment is because at the moment our angle here is degrees, but that's calculated from radians. There's 6.283 radians in a circle, so we need to actually set the minimum and the maximum from 0 to 6.283 to do 360. But we've got a small problem here, is that if we put a variable in here called rads equals 6.283, what I need to do is set the maximum to rads, but the slider only takes whole numbers, it doesn't take floats. So the best way to do this is times it by 1000, so we've moved the decimal space to the right 3 spaces, so we're actually dealing now with 6,283 as a whole number, and then down here we can actually revert back divided by 1000 to allow us to actually use a float in our slider. So let's give that a go. So let's come up, let's jump over to our scene, we'll start moving this. You can see it moves in 360 degrees. So there you go, so that's how to control a piece of geometry or a shape or a model with a slider bar on a GUI. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video, and please look out for some more, and I'd just like to thank my current donators who have donated via my Ko-Fi site. I hope to see you again, and bye for now. Stay safe.